hello everyone, and welcome back to our first episode of Alumni On Air for 2021. My name is Nupur Arya, and on behalf of the HBS Club of India and the HBS India Research Center, thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us. At the outset, we hope everyone has been safe and sound in what has been one of the most trying years of our time. This series, born amidst the 2020 lockdown, is a huge testament to the resilience of the HBS spirit, which stood strong despite a year that was sort of globally defined by polarizing politics and a paralyzing pandemic, I suppose. So in a year when many of our alums were more isolated than they have been, frankly, ever before, Alumni On Air offered a diverse set of voices and experience, as well as rich and deep knowledge, through which we as a community across the region could engage with, could learn from, and most importantly, support and inspire one another. Today promises to be another such discussion. Ravi Venkatesan, MBA 1992, is the Special Representative for Young People and Innovation at UNICEF and founder of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship, GAME. He is the author of a highly acclaimed book, Conquering the Chaos, Win in India, Win Everywhere, and much to the delight of his fans, has another upcoming book called What the Heck Do I Do with My Life? Having been chairman of the Bank of Baroda, board member and co-chairman of Infosys, chairman of Microsoft India, Ravi has had an exceptionally impressive corporate career. But his staggering success can perhaps be best measured in how he has tried to affect change and create lasting and meaningful impact in the lives of others. Ravi was instrumental in creating Project Shiksha, a computer literacy program which has trained over 40 million school children. He helped establish the Cummins College of Engineering, India's first engineering college for women. And he's also the founder of Social Venture Partners, a pan-India network of philanthropists. Ravi, clearly there is a lot for all of us to learn from you. Thank you so much for agreeing to share this incredible journey with the community.
Hey, thank you, Nupur, and thank you for inviting me on to this program and agreeing to be the moderator for today. I'm very excited.
It's our pleasure. It's definitely mine personally. So Ravi, it's the start of a new year, which is always a good time to sort of pause and reflect, to look back at the years gone by, if you will, and think about sort of those key influences leading up to this moment. Could you share, Ravi, with us a little bit about the inflection points or moments of change as we sort of kickstart this conversation?
Good grief. I'm 58 years old and I don't know where to start and how to summarize 58 years into a few minutes, and that too in a way that's exciting or interesting to this audience. But let me try. See, one of my favorite quotes, Nupur, is by the psychologist Carol Dweck, who these days is so famous for the growth mindset work. And she says that the real potential of a person is both unknown and unknowable. And it's impossible to imagine what a person can achieve through, a lifetime of passion and toil. And I love that because to such a large extent, I think I am an exemplar of what she said, because it's hard to imagine a young person with a less promising start in life than me. When I was little, all the way till about 10, I was both sickly as well as lacking confidence, and I was terrible at sports and mediocre at studies. And even those who doted on me, like my mom, didn't think I was going to do very much. But talk of influences, things began to change, I think largely because of three influences. From my mom, I inherited a very fierce drive to be successful and a willingness to work hard. The other influence was my dad, from whom I inherited curiosity. And the third was a high school teacher who I'll never forget because she changed my life, Mrs. Malhotra. One day in sixth or seventh grade, I forget, she says, Ravi is going to be a great scientist. Now, why this is important is at that moment, there was zero evidence that I was going to be a scientist, let alone a great one. But she said it, and I believed it. And that belief is what changed my life. So I started studying hard to, meet her expectations and started doing well. And of course, if you did well in science in the 70s, there was only one destiny for you, which was to be an engineer and go to IIT. So the first inflection point in my life was going to IIT. I would say the second one after that was deciding, along with everybody else in my graduating class, to leave India and go abroad. So I went off to the US for graduate studies. A third inflection point, and I have to say this here, it's an HBS audience, was going to HBS. But no, it really did materially change the trajectory of my life. I would say a fourth inflection point was coming back, a decision to come back to India in 96. At the time, that was not an obvious choice or a popular choice, and everybody warned me and discouraged me from doing that. But I came anyway. Yet another inflection point was a decision to move from engineering to software and Microsoft. Felt risky at that time, but worked out well. And then finally, a decision to leave employment and safe options and walk the road less traveled and try lots of different things, which is what I've been up to for the last decade or so. So broadly, about 6 of these material sort of defining moments. When I look back, I'd say there are two things which are kind of interesting. One is an approach to change and risk taking. An awful lot of my friends and colleagues, etc., who didn't take enough risk as much as they could have wanted to, etc. But I had a view that look, change is going to happen whether you want to or not, or wanted to or not, and you can either be proactive and embrace change, or you can allow it to happen to you, in which case you're more of a victim. And I preferred the odds of embracing things. One of the things that influenced that point of view was that I used to care for a lot of older people, twilight of their lives. And across the board, Nupur, I saw there was lots of regret. And the regret was not about decisions taken that didn't work out. It was about risks not taken. I wonder what my life would have been if only I had done that. So I said, look, I'm not going to be like that. I don't want to look back at my life and wonder how it would have been. I'm going to take these big risky moves. And so I think the courage to walk my own path and figure it out has been kind of materially sort of important. The other thing is when I look back and, yesterday as I was thinking about this talk, I was reflecting on what is it that I can learn from my own journey and professional journey. And I say three things. And the first is, look, hard work trumps talent. I'm living proof of that. Okay, there were lots of really smarter people who didn't nearly achieve as much, and just because I was willing to work harder than anyone else. I think the second one is teams. I mean, if we achieved a lot, it's usually because I really had the great joy of working with fantastic teams. And there's some people I see on the call who were part of former teams. And the third one, which is not to be underestimated, in fact, we tend to, is good luck.
Yeah.
So, even Isaac Newton said, if I have seen farther than others, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And I just look back at my life and at so many important moments. Somebody just came into my life who, gave me good advice, opened the right doors, took a chance on me, etc. And it's hard to stand here today and claim that it's all because of my own hard work and brilliance and so forth. No, I think luck has just a huge amount to do with wherever we end up.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, because while you started off answering that question saying you don't know how you're going to summarize those 50 odd years, you have actually seemingly lived almost 100 years in those 50 years because of those beautiful risks that you took and embraced. Picking up on that sort of thread of those risks that you took and looking at those people who didn't sort of capitalize on opportunities and would have regretted that. Ravi, you sort of, took risks that are, like you describe yourself, kind of unprecedented in terms of, first, you've worked at an industrial company, you've worked at a technology firm, at a financial institute, and now in philanthropy, and that's an incredible sort of landscape that you're covering in a short period of time. So tell me a little bit about that, or our audience rather, in terms of how has that sort of shaped your identity? Because taking those risks can be very daunting for many folks, and many of our alumni who are thinking about that. You sort of are at the top of your career, and then you sort of restart, right? And then you sort of jump into a new sector, a new industry. Did that in any way shape your sort of identity, or did you ever self-doubt? Can you walk us through a little bit about how those sort of changes kind of influence that?
That's a really interesting question. So when Steve Jobs or somebody said you can only connect the dots looking backwards. You can't connect them looking forwards. And so when I look back, about every 7 years or so, I have ended up walking away from everything and starting afresh. And it wasn't by intent. It's not like there's some alarm clock out there that says it's 7 years, it's time to move. It's just worked out that way. And, I think about professional careers in the sense of these S-curves of technology. I think we're all sort of aware of these S-curves, right? So there's one technology and then it flattens out and then a new technology replaces it and it follows its own S-curve. So you have mainframes replaced by PCs or PCs replaced by cloud computing or whatever. So I think it's a pretty useful way to think about professional life and careers as well. And so there's some people who just have one S-curve, and that's not a bad thing. If you have an S-curve like Satya Nadella at Microsoft, that is, seriously okay. But there are too many who are on that S-curve and they plateau and they're just sort of trudging along. And, they plateau at 35 or 40 and they're not learning, they're not growing. That's really not great. And so what happens is every time I found myself plateauing on one S-curve, I'd begin either be open, or it would happen opportunistically, or I would begin a conscious search for another S-curve to jump onto. And that's how these radical transitions have happened from engineering to software to IT services, banking, social sector, etc. And I think there is something really useful here for a lot of people because, from time to time, all of us will come to a point where you hate what you're doing, but you don't know what to do next. And so you just grit your teeth and, good soldier, march on, let me just, it's okay, it's not bad, it brings in good money, I don't know what, so, till I figure it out. And then years pass, and that's really a terrible waste. So I think a big lesson is that when you get into one of these situations, how do you experiment in a very intentional way in order to find your next S-curve? But saying it is easy and doing it is really hard. One of the reasons you hinted at is identity. Because work, it turns out, is not just about making money and earning a living. Work is so many things, including and especially identity. When we introduce ourselves to a stranger, very quickly, within the first 30 seconds, we blurt out, I'm an entrepreneur, or I work for so-and-so. It's just so integrally part of who we are, particularly Harvard Business School alumni, etc., being the achievers most of us are. And so when it comes time to shift gears like this and step off into the unknown, it becomes pretty scary because who am I if I am nobody? And until you establish yourself on the new S-curve, you are nobody because you're starting, as you said, from zero again. So this is one reason why I find lots of people hesitate to take as much risk in these transitions. And their next step often tends to be something similar or incremental, and they don't stray very far away from where they started, which is a pity because life is so much richer. So anyway, that's something I've had to really work on because it's not easy. I was terrified. In fact, I wrote a series of articles in 2012 in the Economic Times called The Fear of Being Nobody. And it did really well. I think it got about 1 million views or something because I was so honest. And so I was terrified too. But then you confront your fear and eventually, think you make a success of it. But this is a big deal.
Thank you, Ravi, because I don't know how many people would so frankly talk about their fears like this. And I think that's what I think alums today are going to really appreciate, because they can relate to that in many ways, which is feeling of vulnerability and the frustration of trying to overcome that fear. And it's a self-realization that sort of evades the best of us. So can you walk us through, because you mentioned experiments, and I want to dive into that a little bit more, because can you walk us through sort of what are the experiments potentially you've taken to sort of discover the self-realization of sorts, become more comfortable with that discomfort, and simultaneously if there's some sort of suggestions that you could give to our alums in terms of what kind of experiments they could also look to do?
Great. No, so look, I decided in 2010, I'm done at Microsoft. I've pretty much achieved what I want to. I'm no longer having as much fun. Time to move on, except I didn't know what to move on to. Then finally I said, all right, well, let's just take a jump and figure it out on the fly, learn by doing. And the only thing I was clear about in 2011 is I'm no longer going to be an employee. I refuse to be an employee and do all those mindless things again, work for people I don't care for. So I'm going to be, self-employed, freelancer, gig worker, entrepreneur. I don't know what, but I'm going to do that. And that's when I began to do these experiments. Now, the thing about these experiments is it was intentional. I knew they were experiments. I said, I'm going to try on different things which are possibilities. And many of them actually didn't work out, but I learned it's not my thing by doing it. So for instance, I decided I'll start a cloud software company for small businesses because it was related to what I was doing before. And I pulled out a great team from Microsoft. Mr. Murthy agreed to angel fund it. And then he just asked me to sleep on one question before deciding. He says, look, are you sure you want to do it? Because when things don't go right, you'll be the one getting the calls. So I thought about it and I realized the only reason I'm doing this is because everybody else in Bangalore is doing some startup. And so I'm just part of that thundering herd and I had no real passion for it. So I decided to drop it. Okay. So that was an example of an intentional experiment that I took a certain distance. Another experiment which failed. I'll talk about failures because it's very important to realize that you'll try many things and 8 out of 10 won't work out. I decided I wanted to bring some company into India, but not as an employee and their country manager, but as a partner. And who better in 2012 than Amazon, right? So we reached out all the way to the top at Amazon and said, look, with the FDI rules, you will need an Indian partner and somebody who's built Indian businesses and so forth. And again, Catamaran was willing to put up the capital for the Indian partner, and we were going to do this. But in the event, Bezos and Mr. Murthy decided that they could do the deal without me, and they did. Correct decision, but it didn't work out. I was very excited about venture capital. So I did two things. I joined Kalari Capital, Vani Kola as a venture advisor. And then a colleague of mine from Microsoft, Will Poole, and we started Unitas Ventures as an impact fund. And then after a few years, I realized, it's okay, but that's not really me. That my passion is not there. So of course, Unitas Ventures continues quite well. I'm still a venture partner and investor, but that's about it. So the point is you try many things, but other things work out. So I wrote my first book, Conquering the Chaos, and I realized I like writing. I like writing, speaking, teaching, and so that stays alive. So I found an important new avenue. I joined some boards and got very active with them. And Infi was a particularly interesting board at that time. And I was there for 7-8 years. Bank of Baroda happened the same way. And so that was a fruitful experiment. I decided to try some experiments in the social sector. And one of them was starting something called Social Venture Partners. And there were several of us who got together to get that going, including, I don't know if Ganesh Natarajan is on the phone, but he was one of the early people who helped start it and then took over from me as the chairperson. And that led to everything I'm doing today, whether it's GAME, UNICEF, etc. But the point is to try many things, not knowing which ones will fit, which ones won't. And then the universe also has a point of view on which doors are going to open and which ones are not. So you have to be willing to do this. So what advice would I have to somebody who's kind of saying, I'm at a point where I want to do something else, but I'm not sure. Try many things. Somebody has thought about, I'd love to teach. Well, go try teaching, teach a program, teach a course at some institute near you, and figure out whether you enjoy it or this was just something you had in your head. Okay, I want to do a startup. Fine, go start volunteering and spending time with some young company near you and see if the culture and what it takes is you. Social sector. So many of you are at a point where you want to give back. Okay, join SVP, start volunteering time, and see if this is something that you get energy from. Or no, it's nice. I'll just write a check, and that's about what I'm prepared to do at this point. So the whole thing is try things. The other thing I would advise to alumni is this, and I write about this in my book, which is to a very large extent, the opportunities we have and the constraints we face are shaped by our networks. And so if you change your networks, you end up changing your life. And so how do you change your networks? Well, you start hanging out with different types of people. Okay. And suddenly you'll be part of different conversations and different opportunities will present themselves. Move to a different city. Okay. So these are all things you can do when you reach that point in the road. I think I'm talking too long in response to your question, so you can always cut me off.
Not at all, not at all. This actually covers some great ground because I think a lot of people will sort of appreciate your advice on these experiments. And in fact, I'm going to take a moment right now to just ask everyone in the audience to sort of type in for us if you are actually trying new things, if you are experimenting the way that Ravi is describing, let us all know what it is that you're experimenting with. What are you guys working on? How are you sort of pushing yourselves out of your comfort zone? I think all of us would sort of benefit from hearing from all of your experiences. So I'm going to go ahead and put that out there because it'll be for everyone's benefit to sort of learn from that. Ravi, I'm going to quickly ask you to just sort of, I know you talked about these failed experiments and potentially some of them being successful, making that slightly more philosophical, if you will, but can you sort of talk to us a little bit about what does failure sort of mean to you? Or how have all of these experiences, these milestones that we reflected on, the way that you've experimented years later, has that sort of redefined in any way what success really means for you? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so you've asked two questions. One is failure, one is success. And I don't know which one you want me to.
I was hoping just to dive into both, but quickly, just in the interest of time.
I think the word failure is one of the most toxic words in the language, okay, because it has some very negative and often devastating kind of connotations. And to me, failure is merely a setback, usually temporary, okay? And it's an essential part of learning. You cannot learn and you cannot grow and you cannot develop if you don't fail. Okay, and that's one of those things that is an essential part of that growth mindset, right? So you imagine a young child, toddler learning to walk, and she gets up and falls, gets up, falls. Then she takes 2 steps and then falls, and it's a pretty messy sight, except to the indulgent parents, right? And imagine if we decided after the first few falls, this is just too hard, it's a failure, the experiment failed. What would we achieve in life? And I think the same attitude, the childlike mindset is what we need to retain as adults, which is these are all experiments and they teach me something, okay? And then from that, they're important experiences and I'm going to learn and grow from it. The only failure I really think is quitting, giving up, okay? And So, yeah, so I never saw these as devastating setbacks. I saw them as an integral part of the exploration. Okay. So, yeah, and if you define it that way, then it tends to be not nearly as sort of required nearly as much courage. On the issue of success, I think I've sort of agonized more about that than anything else, because, we all, I think, end up having an implicit theory of happiness that says that if the more I achieve and the more successful I am, the happier I am going to be. And, I reached a point in my mid 40s, nearly a decade ago, where that correlation no longer existed. Okay. There was no correlation between achievement and success and happiness.
Mhm.
And Clay Christensen actually talks about it too in his book, for those of you who've read his now a decade old book. And so, the thing I realized on introspection on success is this is a really, wild goose chase, because success has many problems. First of all, it's relative. Okay. Okay, I'm successful, but compared to so many others, I'm pretty mediocre on any dimension, whether it's wealth, achievement, power, influence, the works. There are many, many, many more people I can look at who are wildly more successful than I am. So it's relative. The
Right.
second problem is it's fickle.
Yep.
I was thinking about all the people who have made all these lists: 40 under 40,
Hmm.
most powerful women, biggest CEO ever. And then a few years later, you hard pressed to recollect their names.
Mhm.
Okay. Because the world moved on to, newer people. So this success stuff is a mirage. And the worst thing is there is this complete difference between being successful and feeling successful.
Mhm.
So this is where, I think we need to go inside and begin to develop our own definition of success rather than try and live life by other people's definition of success. And this is incredibly easy to say and one of the hardest thing for some people, including me, especially me. So I had to spend almost a decade, you know, sort of de-addicting myself from the old definitions of what is success. Success means being a big CEO, making this money, being on the front row of the Economic Times Awards, opining on the budget, all this stuff, to having more intrinsic definitions of success. And I think today I would say, at least to me, success has a lot to do with having a sense of purpose. Okay, so knowing why you're here and being able to live a life so that if time's up, there's relatively little regret. I think that feels to me like a more robust definition of success, which means what? Spend time only with people you like, do only the things that give you joy and energy, don't procrastinate in terms of doing things that are fun, all those sorts of things. So I made radical changes in my life over the last decade to make sure that I don't spend any time with people I don't truly enjoy, and I spend minimum time doing things I don't like, etc., etc. So yeah, it feels pretty good.
Wow, that is some really deep insights. And I think we, in that one
Really.
question.
No, but one of the things is, as I sort of thought about all these issues and I'm writing my book, one of the things I realized is everything useful, important, original was said 2,500 years ago or more. And it's
Wow.
just been repeated in many, many different forms in newer contexts, different contexts. That is, yeah, this is really old stuff.
Well, it is old stuff, but it's always so nice to be reminded of it, especially given the sort of pace at which we're operating and the pace at which the world has been changing. Sometimes you almost have to go back to the basics. And it's kind of nice to be able to use the start of a new year, if not anything else, to sort of pause and think about what's really important, what's really worth focusing on. And so shifting gears a little bit from here, Ravi, you've talked about these experiments and how you sort of use that to define success for yourself. But when the world around us is changing the way it has been, we have sort of a lot of questions that have come through from the alumni ahead of time, trying to get your views around how can we be successful in the 21st century. And this perhaps stems from your book as well. and people taking cognizance of the fact that you have, of course, done a tremendous amount of work analyzing the future of India and the future of the people in India. So as you sort of dive into what that future looks like, can you walk us through the sort of fundamentals that we need to be successful going forward?
Yeah.
We have Hari from Amazon who asked specifically, what do the fundamentals of 2021 look like? So is there a mindset, is there a skill set to really flourish? Sandhya asked something similar, which is, what are the areas that we should really focus on to be sort of in terms of training, in terms of skilling? So what can we sort of take away from all of these experiences of yours in terms of how to be successful going forward?
Question. And obviously, I don't have the answer. I have a point of view. But it's an sort of well-formed point of view because I've spent 2.5 years with the UNICEF project thinking about this on behalf of young people everywhere. So the most important thing about the 21st century is going to be just one thing, which is the staggering rate of change. Okay, the world will change more in this 21st century, this 100 years, than in all of human history, because there is this exponential nature of change. And then that you also have the impact of climate change and all the consequences of humans on the planet, etc. And so whether you're a company or an institution, a college, or individual, a country, everybody's challenge is just the same thing. How do we adapt to extremely fast changing circumstances? So when you say, what will it take to succeed in the 21st century? The short answer is we have to have, much greater capacity to cope with change, adapt to changes. And those of us who like structure, predictability, etc., are going to find it very, very difficult. So what does this then translate into? I think it translates into lots of consequences. The first one is mindset. I think Hari or somebody asked that. Okay, it does take a very different mindset. And mindset is, has many, 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 many manifestations. So one aspect is a set of attributes which Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, which is really very good, a very powerful, specific articulation of what's the difference and how do you need to, develop some new attitudes, including how we define success, how do you define failure, know it all to learn it all those kinds of good things. An equally crucial aspect of, the particular aspect of mindset I would focus on even more specifically is how we define success, which I talked about earlier. I think there is another aspect of mindset which is very important, which we can unpack, which is I call the abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset. Okay, so there's a set of things around mindset. Then there's a set of things around skills. And unfortunately, every discussion on skills seems to very quickly. I was just doing something on LinkedIn, and it says, here are the skills you need to get hired in 2021. And it says Python, JavaScript, data science. Yeah, the problem with these is these may get you a job, but these are very fast shifting goalposts. Next year's languages are something different. The skill requirements change very rapidly. So again, I tend to emphasize skills which are durable and future proof, in the sense you come back 100 years from now, they're still important, relevant, if not more important. So what would these be? One of the skills is what people call learning agility, which is your ability when you're thrown into a new context or circumstance, which you've never seen before. How do you quickly figure things out on the fly and make a success of it? And it's the ability to unlearn and relearn new things, etc. A second one, I think, has to do with people skills. So there's this fear that the robots are coming, the bots are coming, software is coming, and it's going to eat. The answer is not to outrun the bots. You never will, right? The answer is to become much more human, okay? Even as they do better what they do better. So we emphasize people skills. if you can get along with people, and particularly if you have leadership skills, right? The ability to mobilize others, particularly those who, don't report to you, lead by influence, get stuff done, solve problems, convert opportunities into, businesses. You're going to be priceless. Uh, Okay. These are not things that a robot is going to figure out. So I think people skills is the second one. And the third is, set of things which we call entrepreneurial ability. And this is, again, we've proven again and again in high schools environments can be learned. And so, there are going to be fewer and fewer jobs out there of the kinds that we all, knew or have or whatever. And so everybody has to learn how to be part of what is called the passion economy. I like that term, where you figure out what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and try and find a way to make these connect so that you can pay the bills and have fun. So I think the entrepreneurial skills are going to be more and more and more important. So yeah, long answer again, mindset, skill set. Also, the fact is we are living longer. So human lifespans are increasing, even as there is more churn and instability, and the half-life of knowledge is declining, which means what? You can't say that my learning ended the day I graduated from business school. It began that day. And you have to be a lifelong student. And, so right now, for instance, I realized in the last week, actually, that my knowledge of and understanding of technology is completely outdated. It dates back to 2018 when I left the board of Infosys. Well, it turns out that these 3 years were extraordinarily momentous and fertile in technology. And, my knowledge base is just woefully out of date. So I've got hold of two young guys who are going to tutor me every Saturday for the next few Saturdays. So this willingness to go back and be a student, I think is very crucial.
Wow, willingness to go back and be a student and to be a lifelong learner, I think is something that we can all sort of take away from this. But related to that, Ravi, you started off by when you spoke of your influences and points of inflection. HBS was one of them. And since you mentioned sort of your student life and your journey going forward, even as being a lifelong learner, can you talk to us about what role did HBS specifically play in that journey? Were there mentors? Were there professors? Were there classmates? Were there authors that had a more significant influence on this mandate that you've taken up personally to be a lifelong learner?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I went to school 25 years ago. No, sorry, nearly 30 years ago. Ouch. And it was a different world. Okay. So first of all, going there, competing with people, doing well, gave me a lot of self-confidence, which didn't hurt. I think at that time, pedigree mattered much more than pedigree matters today. I think with each passing year, the school you went to, etc., matters less and less. But back then, it mattered a great deal. So it did change the trajectory of my career and presented new options. I was very actively engaged with the school as an alum till about 2013. So I was, I'm a quasi academic. I just didn't have the grit to finish and become a professor. But as a result, my intellectual engagement with the school has been strong. They published the book I wrote. I've taught some classes there. And a lot of the faculty, at least until they retired, were good friends. So it was a big part of my intellectual sort of energy. I must say that, and of course, there are a few of my classmates who are just the closest friends. But I just think it probably, when I look back, it probably shaped my worldview more than anything else. In the last decade, I've been dramatically less engaged with the school, I realize. But yeah.
Excellent. So with that, Ravi, I know that HBS having the influence that it has had on you is of great significance. So here to offer us a little more insight into that time, I'm delighted to have a very special guest with us here today. Who better to offer a view into Ravi the student than a fellow HBS classmate?
Good
So
grief.
here with us is Mr. Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament in class of 1992, as a distinguished surprise guest of ours. Jayant, thank you so much for taking the time and keeping this a surprise. We are so delighted that you could join us here today.
Oh, I'm so pleased to see Jan. Hi, Jan.
Hi, Ravi. Hi, everyone. And I'm really glad I could join. I'm just rushing out of Parliament. We were in a committee meeting which just finished. So I apologize for being in a car and being on my phone.
Remember,
but I wanted to surprise Ravi.
Don't spill all the beans.
I'm here to spill all the beans, Ravi. That's why I'm joining.
Thank you so much, Janji, for taking the time. And clearly you have a busy schedule, so we appreciate you carving it out, even if we are mid-road right now. Just a couple of minutes, if you could give us a behind-the-scenes perspective into the Ravi at school. Were there any sort of insights that you could potentially offer into early signs of leadership, glimpses, perhaps, early glimpses into the impact that Ravi was about to make years later, things that are not perhaps in the public domain, if you will. Any fun anecdotes are all allowed. So this is a private alumni community. Please be candid.
No, I'll certainly be candid. None of the serious stuff, more of the fun stuff, of course. And I, of course, have to first remind you all that when Ravi and I went to HBS, as he was pointing out, 30 years ago, it was a very different place for us. There were only two of us who had grown up and been to, college in India who were in HBS at that time. So there were just the two of us. And now, of course, it's a very different environment with so many more people from India, which is absolutely wonderful. But in that time, which was pre-liberalization India, you see, it was 1990. There were very few people who even knew where India was and how you could do business if you could do business in India. So we were both, I think, playing the role of ambassadors along with students as well. So that was one interesting aspect of our life at HBS then. But I'll tell you about Ravi as a student. There were, I think, three very remarkable things about him. One, as he was just saying, that he likes to learn and he is a perennial student. I can tell you all that he was an absolutely brilliant student. And any class I ever took with him, he was very easily the smartest person in the room. So it was pretty amazing to see how brilliant he is and how quickly he could understand everything. So that was one thing that was very remarkable about Ravi. The second thing I really envied about him at HBS was that his tuition and everything else was being paid for by Cummins, if I remember right, Ravi. So you were always extremely well off. I was, of course, struggling and trying to make ends meet. And so I would look at you with great envy as you dashed around, going to important events and parties and paying your way while it was much more difficult for me to do any of that. So he was quite loaded as a student, I remember. And the third fun fact about Ravi is, which I remember distinctly in my mind's eye, he would wear a white pair of shorts and a white T-shirt and go jogging. Now, wearing white was good enough, but the best part about it was that his jogging was the rate at which most people walked. So one day, one of my friends said, he says, "What's with you Indians, right? I mean, like you guys are like zero athletic ability or what? Why is your friend like jogging when he should really be walking at that speed?" So Ravi tried his best when it came to being athletic, but I think while he was brilliant as a student, that was not his forte. So that's a fun fact about Ravi. He did his best when it came to athletic pursuits, but we are happier that he's written the book and really contributed so many great insights. Ravi, every day I must be recommending Conquering the Chaos to somebody or the other, because I think that's a really fabulous book.
No,
so
Jan,
those are some of my memories.
So, Jan, clearly you deserve a commission for the number of copies you've recommended and sold on my behalf. Thank you. But no, look, that's one of the nice things about HBS. There are probably about 10 people I've been in continuous close touch with over the years, and Jayant's one of them. He, of course, is no friend of mine because he conned me into taking that Bank of Baroda job when Minister of State, but that was great fun too. And the other really fun fact is Jayant shared with me a paper, which in those days, it was barely the first PC. So this was a typewritten article on India history, the sort of devastating indictment of Mrs. Gandhi and as a prime minister, and it was remarkable, the scholarship that you had displayed at that time. I preserved the copy. I still have it. If you need it back, I can get a photocopy. So yeah.
No, thank you for remembering that, Ravi. It was actually done on a word processor. So back in '92, we were word processing at that time. So I remember I did it on a PC, but it was really about India's industrial policy since independence, and many of the problems we talked about then are absolutely true even now. So some things have changed, some things have not changed.
Anyway, this is a terrific, nice surprise, Nupur. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Jayant. We greatly appreciate it. As a community, these sort of early bonds and relationships have such a formidable influence on the person that we turn out to be. And it was such a treat for the community at large and for me personally to see two great ambassadors of India. If you two were the ambassadors of the time in '92, I think we were in good hands. So appreciate you taking us down memory lane, and thank you once again. We really appreciate your time. And I know you have to go, but thank you for carving that out.
You're very welcome. Look forward to catching up with everyone soon. Bye-bye.
And Sarji.
Thank you. Great. So with that, Ravi.
Yeah, that's fun.
I'm glad that worked out. It's always nice to sort of give it a little bit of a personal touch, especially for people who've been so active in the community and active like you have.
The third semi-Indian was Tarun Khanna.
Yeah.
Although he had studied at Princeton and had an American accent even back in 1990. But we were the three lonely musketeers representing India.
Awesome. Well, with that, Ravi, I know we don't have that much more time left, and I want to cover a couple of other quick things before we wrap up. So first and foremost, I mean, I know talking about the school and the mission of the school, the work that you're doing today is so significant and related to that. But before we dive into that, I want to ask you that, a lot of alums, seeing people like Jayant and you both have sort of stepped away from this rat race. You walked away from that treadmill. Somehow you were able to provide that perspective, or offer that perspective within your own lives. And in a time like COVID, when we've all sort of had to pause and scale down, more importantly, can you share your views on the sort of million-dollar question, which is how much is enough? Because there are a lot of alums that I'm sure want to get off this treadmill like you have done, who want to give back, but they sort of struggle in terms of adjusting, in their own minds, what that number might be. And I'm going to ask Shirley.
Money, wealth, all that.
Yes, and I'm going to ask Shirley, while you give that answer, to launch a poll that we've, just wanted to get a gauge from the audience in terms of what their view was, or you guys can type it in. It's essentially to understand per person, per month, what do you really need in India? So adjusting for everything else, and please do go ahead. So sorry, before you do that, I'm just going to let alums know that this is anonymous, so there's no judgment. So go ahead and just, we would love 100% participation. It'll be down in 30 seconds. Sorry, Ravi, go ahead.
No, it's interesting you use the phrase, how much is enough, because it's the title of a chapter in my book. Because I think this issue of money is one of the most central and complex questions for many of us. It's not for everyone, but for many of us. And I once heard somebody describe it this way. They say money is like salt, where too much or too little are both a problem, right? So this question then of how much is enough becomes quite central. And again, good old Clay Christensen talks about it in his book from a decade ago, where he says, look, particularly HBS alums, they're addicted to success, winning, making more. And every time they succeed, they get a hit. And then that hit becomes addictive. And so you're on this treadmill, except that the treadmill is going faster and faster, and you have to run harder and harder to stay in place. And so the problem here, of course, is that beyond some point, it no longer gives you pleasure and joy, except you're trapped. And you're trapped very largely not by need, but so much as by greed and insecurity. And certainly, I'm no exception to this. I'm a person who, fortunately, has had a fairly modest set of needs all my life, and for most of my working life, I've earned comfortably more than what I needed to spend. But still, it's a psychological issue. You see somebody else making $1 million. You suddenly say, well, I better get there too. $1 million today, people feel, they laugh at it. Nobody gets out of bed for $1 million, it seems like. You need to be at least at 10. So, so there's that. And then, you're worried about, accidents and things like that, and you're running out of money and so on and so forth. So what really made a big difference to me as I was thinking about how am I going to get off the treadmill and how much is enough, was a book which not many people may have heard of, but was very useful to me. It's called The 4.5-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And don't go out and buy the book, buy mine instead. But here's the central idea that's useful. He said, look, go do some basic arithmetic. How much do you need to maintain the lifestyle you need? Okay, no sacrifices, hardship, and all that. Okay, whatever you want, you need to take those vacations, fine. What does it cost? I like fine wine. What does that cost? And okay, therefore, what you need to make per month, and figure out what is the minimum time that you need to spend to earn that amount. Well, he said many people, not all people by any means, should be able to do this by working 4.5 hours or half a day a week. And lo and behold, I found that I could make my number by working about half a day a month, okay, instead of 2 days a month. And so since 2011, I've arranged my life so I work for money for 2 days a month, and I have 28 days to do all the other wonderful, interesting things that I wish to do. So I think just going through the discipline of sort of knowing that number and figuring out a model where I could do this in a really time efficient way and optimize for time made a big difference. The second thing has to do with overcoming your own psychological fears and needs and greeds and all that stuff. And this is where I must say, again, a lot of conversations with, one of my friends, Nupur Mehta. He's an amazing guy in California who runs this organization called Service Space. And, he keeps talking about abundance and scarcity. He says the most poor person is actually the rich guy who feels he's not rich enough. Okay. And on the other hand, you have people who have nothing, who are incredibly generous. And so how do you cultivate consciously an abundance mindset? And then the other important thing he talks about is that there's not just one form of capital. It's not just about money. It's money, time, love, expertise, networks, all these things. How do you develop a sense of abundance towards these things? And that's not easy because it takes, in my case, conscious effort, cultivation. And what really helped me think about this is death. Every time you see I see someone who's dying or dead, you realize you can take nothing with you. It's not a new idea. Just reminding yourself you came with nothing, you're going to go with nothing. And I keep using the metaphor of software licensing, which is when you use Microsoft Office, and I hope you all do, nobody owns it. Okay. You just have a license to use it. Okay. That's all. And that's the way with all our assets, that we have a temporary license to use it, and it can be taken away, revoked at any point. And so these kinds of things have gradually allowed me to, have money loosen its grip on me. And so stepping off was not quite as much a sacrifice. Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of people on this call, I bet, who've well passed their thresholds. But and for them, I'd say if you're loving what you do, that's fantastic. But otherwise, step off.
Well, that's really helpful, and I think everyone can see the results. I wonder if you want to comment on them really quickly. But there is, like you said, a big range.
What is it?
So 16% said less than 50,000 rupees per month per person. 32% said 1 lakh. 19% 2 lakhs. 19% said 3 lakhs. 13% said more than 5 lakhs per person per month. So there is clearly, depending on, and I tried to sort of equalize it for number of people per month, just how much do you really need to get out of bed, like you said. But I guess everyone's appetite's a little bit different.
Look, I haven't seen the numbers for India, but the US number, Western Europe number seems to be that happiness is fairly highly correlated with money up to about $75,000 per year for a small family. And beyond that, it begins to diverge. Okay. So and my own guess in India is it's somewhere in the region of 1 to 2 lakhs. Okay. Beyond that, it's good to have more. It's nice to have more, right. But it's not going to as linearly increase your happiness. Right. It's interesting to see the number. That's what 80% seem to indicate as well. Somewhere in that range. So great.
Fantastic, Ravi. With that, I want to sort of ask you a little bit now about your work, because you stepped away from this treadmill. Somehow you figured that out. And depending on the stage, of course, everyone's at a different stage in their career, different stage of their savings plan, all of that. But you very gracefully stepped away from that corporate realm, if you will, to really start thinking about giving back and trying to make a meaningful impact in the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing right now in the social sector? What are the goals you're gunning for? And is there a way that potentially alums could sort of contribute or help? We did have some alums wanting to get your views on what are the domains that need help. Someone asked around social impact investing. And so if you could talk a little bit about that work, that would be great.
All right. Now, I noticed several people jumping off because they probably had planned only till 6. So to all of them, I'll say thank you for joining. I hope we get to continue the conversation. For the rest, look, a large part of what I do is work with UNICEF, where for the last 2.5 years, I've been helping build a global mission called Generation Unlimited. Look, everywhere young people are facing a challenge, which is the education system is their countries, and this includes America and developed countries, and is designed for a world that no longer exists, a world which was stable, a world in which access to information was scarce, and so you had to mug up a lot of facts, and so on and so forth. The world is completely different, and we're not churning out kids with the mindset and skill sets that I talked about. So that's kind of issue number one. Number two is jobs. In many, many countries, most countries, particularly post-COVID, the number of good jobs relative to the demand is simply, the asymmetry is very staggering. India is an extreme case of it. And so, so how do you prepare young people for the future of work, where many more of them are self-employed, many more of them are gig workers, many more of them hopefully are entrepreneurs creating good livelihoods for others. So this is our mission. And so we are already operational in about 19 countries, but India was where we got launched first on the ground about a year ago, a little over a year ago. In India, we have 3 big priorities. The first is to engage every young person as a change maker in their own community. How do you get a young person from the lowest socioeconomic background, maybe in school, maybe out of school, to volunteer and start solving small problems around them? I talk a lot about this young kid in Ahmedabad who lives with his family in a municipal garbage dump. His young boy's name is Rehan. So please look it up on some TEDx video. So you can be from the humblest, most difficult, challenged background, and yet we want to engage them and give them these change-making skills, because from that they get self-confidence. They begin to realize I'm not a victim. I'm much more in control of my choices than I thought I was, and they learn some leadership skills. We've launched in Punjab at some scale. We want to take this across the country. 300 million people, young people, is our goal for the next few years. The second one is to give every young person, whether in a government school or private affordable private school, what are called increasingly 21st century skills, which includes entrepreneurial mindset, communication, problem solving, working in teams, blah, blah, blah. Then we have the third one, which is third priority, which is how do we give many more young people access to good quality career counseling. So based on their aptitude, based on their interest, they're guided down appropriate paths. How do you staple internships and apprenticeships to opportunities to this, and then eventually connect them to the kind of work that's out there? And our goal is 100 million people placed successfully over the next few years. So the Generation Unlimited is essentially a collection of private sector, government, civil society organization working in mission mode around this. Our work is all across India. So any alums or any non-alums who want to find a way to get involved, we have an infinite number of needs. So far, we've been focused on just getting off the ground last year, launching programs, etc. But as I was telling you, Nupur, I think we need to figure out models where people can contribute time, contribute money, contribute expertise, access to their networks and all this. For instance, can you second one person from your company for 1 year? For instance, can you offer internships to 5 young people for a year, okay, or 3 months? There are lots of different ways. And what I'm hoping I can get some help from after this call is figuring out what are some easy ways in which folks can contribute. So this is one piece. Another giant piece that I do is I have my own organization, which I helped start, called GAME. It's an not-for-profit, but we're very, very serious, very well-funded. And we're trying to create 10 million new entrepreneurs in India over the next decade. These are not tech startups in Bangalore and Gurgaon and Mumbai. These are every kind of mundane business, motorcycle repair shop, beauty salon, food business, etc. Anything that will create 5 to 20 employees. And so we are in the early stages, year 2 now, of that work. And the two, of course, dovetail, because we want lots of these young people to do that. One of the most stunning things we run is a program in 1,024 Delhi government schools. This is all thanks to Manish Sisodia ji. And we run a mandatory entrepreneurship curriculum for kids from grade 8 to 11. And the first period they study in the morning is entrepreneurship. They learn this by doing, not by studying it. It's exactly like the entrepreneurship program in HBS, where they have to launch a business. The government gives each young person 1,000 rupees as a loan, and they get together in teams. They have to launch a business during the summer holiday, and then they have to return the money. 92% of them return the money. So all the money. Some of them return a little bit of a loss, but fabulous stuff. And yeah, we'd love to get such amazing people as all of you involved in some of these things.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi. I know we're a few minutes past the hour, so being cognizant of everyone's time, on behalf of the HBS Club of India and the HBS India Research Center, thank you so much for that enriching hour. It was such an interesting session, and for me, there were so many takeaways, and as I'm sure there was for everybody else, as you would have seen in the comments coming through. I'm going to highlight my top 3 because for me, I think the fact that you were able to sort of replace the comfort that's associated with those sometimes boring and routine, but secure, but often unfulfilling jobs with a carefully curated portfolio of experiences was one really important takeaway. The fact that you detached, as you did, from these iconic global brands and institutions that we also dearly hold on to for the life of God, that's really where we drive our sort of external validation from, to sort of build your own personal brand, your own title, your own business card, I think was extremely an important takeaway. And finally, the fact that you overcame all that inertia, that fear of failure, which all of us often struggle with, to really carve your own path, to start from scratch many times over, when you could have really sat back and enjoyed the fruits of your labor of years gone by, but somehow were willing to do that and did so successfully, I think are all really important things for our alums to focus on. And I hope they all do sort of show up to the call of action and get involved in a more meaningful way. So you've left us with profound yet practical things to think about as we embark upon the new journey. Thank you so much for your time. And a heartfelt thank you again to our special guest who isn't here with us now, but Mr. Jayant Sinha, for his offering of time and contributing to the session. And finally, to all our alums, thank you for taking the time to join us on this conversation. We hope to see you again soon. Until we meet again, stay safe and stay well. And to those of you who want to stick around for a couple of extra minutes, I think Ravi has 5 more minutes. But I will allow everyone else to, of course, carry on. I understand that we are past the hour. Thank you once again, Ravi. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nupur. You get full marks for assimilating the lessons and even more full marks for being the extraordinary moderator that you are. I think you have a bright career down that